major rescue operation is currently underway in the North Sea after an oil tanker and a cargo vessel collided this morning off the coast of Hull. These pictures that were sent to the BBC show smoke billowing from both ships. The American-flagged tanker is the Stena Immaculate. On the tracking side, it was seemingly at anchor outside Hull when it was hit by the Solong, a Portuguese-flagged container that was heading south from the Scottish port of Grangemouth towards Rotterdam in the Netherlands. The chief executive of the port of Grimsby East was told there was a massive fireball after the collision. Reports of people abandoning ship, lifeboats and firefighting teams quickly dispatched to the scene. More than 30 casualties have so far been brought ashore at Grimsby. The Coast Guard rescue helicopter was scrambled from Humberside alongside lifeboats from Skegness, Bridlington, Maplethorpe and Cleethorpes. This is the map of the location. The collision site is around 20 kilometres off the coast there. And if we switch to this map from marine traffic, then you will see that at the time there were a lot of ships in that area. As you would fully expect, on any given day, there is a lot of shipping that comes in and out of the Humber estuary and the container port in Hull. So an obvious question, why was more care not being taken? Let's speak to our reporter, Rowan Bridge, who's just arrived in Grimsby Fours. Let's start with the rescue, Rowan. What do we know about the crews on board?
Yes, well, we know that at least 32 people have been brought ashore following that collision. They have been brought through the port here in Grimsby, where I am, but the condition of some of those is not yet known. We know that at least 20 people who were on board the tanker have all been accounted for, but the condition of the others brought ashore isn't clear at the moment. We have seen ambulances and emergency services turning up here, presumably ferrying people to hospital, whether that be Grimsby or to Hull or perhaps potentially further afield, depending on how serious their injuries are. I mean, if you saw some of the footage, as you said in your introduction, there were reports of a massive fireball at sea, and then video footage, you can see black smoke billowing from the oil tanker. But what's not clear is exactly how people were able to get off there and how seriously injured before they managed to get off the ship they may be, or indeed who there is who may yet still be to be accounted for.
It seems a fair day behind you, Rowan. Do we know what conditions were like out at sea?
No, I mean, that's still one of those things that's going to be investigated. And as you say, Christian, at the time this happened, one of the vessels was at anchor. It had travelled from Greece up towards the port of Hull and was anchored off the coast of East Yorkshire here when it was struck by the cargo vessel. Now, what's not clear is why that could happen in daylight conditions today. This was reported as about 10 to 10 this morning, so it would have been daylight. What's not clear is what led to those circumstances which allowed that condition, that collision to happen. The other thing which isn't clear at the moment, we're still trying to establish, is what was on board those two vessels at the time. You know, what was on board that oil tanker and what might the implications be of that. Clearly that vessel is on fire, but exactly what was on board at the time and what the implications of any spill from that vessel might be is still unclear at the moment. The investigation branch have arrived here. They are starting preliminary investigations. The Marine Accident Investigation Branch have begun their preliminary investigations into what happens here, but we are still very much in the early stages of this, as you might gather.
Rowan, thank you very much for that. Let's check in with our reporter Phil McCann, who's been following the live events and the reaction to it. Tell us a little bit more about these two ships, if you would, Phil. What do we know about them?
Well, just following on, Christian, from what Rowan was saying there in terms of what the oil tanker was carrying, we have actually in the last few moments had an update from the US logistics firm Crowley. That is the operator and also the joint owner of the MV Stena Immaculate. That's the oil tanker here. And it says that it was carrying jet fuel when it was hit by the container ship Solong in the North Sea this morning. So not crude oil, but jet fuel. The hope, of course, will be that that is the kind of fuel that can dissipate as opposed to the kind of oil that can cause huge environmental damage, especially on coastlines. Significantly, they've also said that all of the ship's crew of more than 20 are safe and accounted for, but they say jet fuel is pouring into the sea. They've given us a statement which continues, a fire occurred as a result of the collision fuel was reported released. The Stena Immaculate crew abandoned the vessel following multiple explosions on board, giving a very dramatic account of what happened. All Crowley mariners are safe, they say, and fully accounted for. Now, the BBC understands that the fuel on board this ship was owned by the US government, which is consistent with the fact that we know that vessel was part of an arrangement with others, a US government arrangement, which is designed to supply the US armed forces with fuel during times of armed conflict or of national emergency. And just to be clear, of course, we know that there are American Air Force bases in several parts of the UK. We don't necessarily know that that was the reason that ship was delivering fuel at that point in time, but we do know now that it was the US government which owned the fuel on board. As for the other ship involved here, of course, the Solong, we haven't had confirmation yet from its owners or operators as to exactly how many people were on board. We know that it was 32 people who have so far been reported to have been rescued and brought ashore at Grimsby, and also no detail from them as to exactly what happened to cause this collision.
No, but as I mentioned, Phil, there was quite a lot of traffic in and around the outskirts of the Humber estuary, as you would expect on any given day. So the question is, why was the approaching ship not taking more care?
Yeah, absolutely, because we know, it seems that we know exactly what happened here from tracking data. I say what happened, not why it happened. We know that the oil tanker was at anchor. It was effectively stopped in the North Sea, and the Solong was coming from the port of Grangemouth in Scotland, going across to Rotterdam, and it hit the oil tanker pretty much head on. And you mentioned this is a very busy, well, there are very busy shipping lanes in this area. That part of the North Sea is an area which nowadays has an awful lot of wind turbines in it. There are lots of ships that have to service those wind turbines. Indeed, we know that at around 10 to 10 this morning, when this collision occurred, there was effectively a mayday call put out so that you had the Coast Guard ships responding and the lifeboat, the RNLI lifeboats responding, but you also had a call put out to other ships that were in the area just to come over to see if they could help, especially if they had firefighting capabilities on board.
Phil, thank you for that. We've got with us our climate and science reporter, Esme Stallard. An important detail that Phil's just given us there, Esme, that there was jet fuel on board. How do you, if you are the government, how do you go about securing the cargo that's on board, and what is the significance of jet fuel over crude oil, say?
Yeah, of course. So as you said, what's very important here is the type of fuel that's on board, and that's because they behave in different ways. So sometimes when we think of oil spills, potentially images of black birds covered in sort of this black oil or the sea covered in it spring to mind. That is crude oil. That's not what we're dealing with here. And that's important because they dissipate differently, as we've just heard. So jet oil, kerosene can evaporate very quickly, which means that it doesn't hang around in the environment for as long. But that's not to say that it doesn't potentially pose harm to the natural environment. And that's because the fumes can be quite toxic. So on a small scale, we're not expecting it to potentially kill fish, but obviously this could be quite a significant spill. And as that enters the water column, it can be toxic to aquatic organisms. There's also concern, obviously, for nearby nature reserves if it was to wash up. And actually, we've had a statement in the last few minutes from the RSPB. I'm just going to read you elements of it here. Dave O'Hara, who's a senior site manager at RSPB Bempton Cliffs, which is a nearby nature reserve, said, as details continue to emerge, our first thoughts are for the safety of everyone on board, but this incident is close to Bempton Cliffs, home to the biggest gannet colony in England. Naturally, we are extremely concerned about the potential of a leak from the tanker. Now, there's obviously been a very quick response, as we've seen from the UK Coast Guard, and they said to us, as part of that response, that we're also looking at a counter-pollution activity to try and prevent that oil dissipating too far into the sea. But one thing to point out about Jet A1 fuel or kerosene is that it is very, very difficult to see. It will be a sheen-like look on the surface. It won't be, as I mentioned, like crude oil. It won't be thick and black, which could potentially make the cleanup operation fairly difficult.
Yeah, but obviously huge anxiety for communities in Grimsby, Scarborough, Cleethorpes, big fishing communities who fish that area of the North Sea and not particularly far off coast.
Exactly. We've already heard there from the local authorities that locals have raised their concerns with them about the potential environmental impact. And, you know, the UK is no stranger to oil disasters. Some people might remember one of the worst environmental disasters this country has seen was back in 1967 when the SS Torrey Canyon ran aground in Cornwall and spilt 100,000 tonnes of, in that case, crude oil, which obviously, as I said, behaves differently. But that will be in the memories of people that, in that case, thousands of fish were killed, and obviously efforts will be taken, as I said, by the UK Coast Guard, but also likely working with some of these environmental organisations such as the RSPB, local fishermen and communities to make sure that the impact on the natural environment is minimised as far as possible.
The government says they are sending crews to try and limit the spill. Obviously, we were just talking to Rowan about this, that the weather will be important, will it not?
It absolutely will be. So at the moment, as we've seen in some of the pictures, there is a massive fire. So obviously that will restrict access and how close some of those crews get to the site of a potential oil spill. But as you mentioned, both the sea conditions and the weather conditions will affect where a spill may move to. So if we're getting winds that could blow that further south, and of course they'll be looking at that, they'll be assessing some of the movement of that. And the tools that they can use also include satellite imagery, and they can pick up potentially where that is spreading, as well as looking at other signatures of the oil.
It's really useful stuff. Thank you for that, Esme. Let's keep our fingers crossed on those weather conditions then. Here's Mike Ross. He is the leader of Hull City Council. He's been giving his reaction to the collision and what actions are now being taken to contain that damage.
First of all, my thoughts go out to all those involved in this terrible incident. Obviously, the crews on the vessels and their family who would have been concerned, but also those who have taken part in the efforts since, the rescue efforts and so on. A major operation. And so I'm just really pleased that so far people have been rescued and taken ashore, and I hope that there's more positive news as this unfolds. I've been contacted by people locally, both within the council and outside, who are obviously very concerned about this. It is obviously for those involved a terrible incident, but just in terms of the impact on the coast and the air as well, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of concern. This is obviously taking place at the moment, and it's something that will be developing over the coming hours and days, and so there's a lot to unpack from all of this. So the Humber itself is known to be one of the most dangerous estuaries in the world, in fact, and I've met with people who operate the vessels out there and the crews, and you know, I know just how difficult it is. The North Sea itself has its own challenges, it's also incredibly difficult. So this would have been concerned that this event has taken place in this way. I'm sure while today is not the day for those sort of questions to be asked, there will be the need to know how exactly this has happened so it can be avoided in the future. There will need to be the work take place very quick, just to understand what the impact of this will be. The East Yorkshire coast is a wonderful coast. We want to see it protected, and anything that might put at risk of this is clearly going to cause concern. And I'm sure there will be a lot of effort, has to be a lot of effort in the coming days to fully understand what the impact has been on this and what actions, most importantly, need to be taken to put right any damage.
Mike Ross there, the leader of Hull City Council. There is just a line from the US shipping company Crowley, which operates the Stena Immaculate. They are saying that there was a ruptured cargo tank containing that Jet A1 fuel. So it's a cargo tank that is ruptured. Where it is, of course, ruptured is a crucial part of the story. I would just draw your attention to the live page on the BBC website with all these breaking news lines currently on it. So do have a look at that.